The first sound was scissors. The second sound was a body hitting a table. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg anyone in that room to believe her. She had spent 6 weeks being invisible. 6 weeks of forms that vanished, reports that became warnings delivered to the wrong people, a system that shook her hand with one arm and sharpened the knife with the other. They thought they knew what she would do. They had never been more wrong. What came next didn't just destroy 3 students. It brought down the people who had been protecting them. By the time Zara Coleman walked out of that conference room on a Friday afternoon in October, 2 students had been suspended, 1 administrator was under investigation, and a system that had been protecting the same people for 3 years had finally run out of places to hide. 6 weeks earlier, she had walked into Harlow Academy for the first time and known within the first hour that something was wrong. This is what happened in between. The first thing they took was small, a pencil knocked off a desk, a shoulder in the hallway. A name whispered just loud enough to carry. The last thing they took, they used scissors. That was their mistake. She had been awake since 4 in the morning. Not from nerves, she told herself that, and mostly believed it. Just awake. The way she got before things that mattered. Her body running ahead of the calendar, already there before the day caught up. She sat up. Looked at the clock, looked at the uniform hanging on the back of her door, dark navy, collar folded, pressed twice the night before, because the first time she thought she saw a crease near the left shoulder and she couldn't leave a crease. Not today. Not at Harlow Academy. Even the name sat differently in the mouth, like something that expected you to speak quietly around it. She stood, moved to the mirror. And there it was, the thing she'd been saving for last because it felt like the most important thing and she hadn't wanted to rush it. Her hair. 4 braid ends, stills from the night before. She'd started around 11, gotten through 2, then stopped because her hands were tired and her eyes were burning, and she'd hold her herself she'd finish in the morning. So she finished now, 4 in the morning, sitting on the edge of her bed with only the desk lamp on, working her fingers through each section the way her grandmother had taught her. Slow, deliberate, left side first, then right. Each braid pulled tight from the root. Grandma Celestine had always said, start clean or don't start at all. She braided until all 4 hung long and even down her back. Then she sat still for 1 second, just 1. She picked up her phone, typed, tomorrow starts now. He replied in 40 seconds, already awake. He said, observe first, react second. She put the phone down. Her mother was in the kitchen when she came out. Elaine Coleman was already dressed, scrubs, hair pinned, coffee in hand, reading something on her phone that she didn't look up from when Zara walked in. This was not unusual. Elaine had 3 expressions, focused, tired, and whatever came after tired when there wasn't a word for it yet. This morning she was wearing the 3rd one. Zara poured herself a glass of water, stood at the counter, waited. Elaine finally looked up, looked at the uniform, looked at the hair, looked at her face, said, collar's good, Zara, I know. Elaine, don't give them a reason. 3 words. That was the whole speech. The good luck and the Amabi believe in you, compressed into 3 words that didn't technically say any of those things, but somehow carried all of them. If you knew how to listen to Elaine Coleman, which took years, Zara said, I know. She picked up her backpack, walked to the door, almost said something about how she was going to be fine, or how this was just a school, just another school. But Elaine had already looked back at her phone, so Zara left. The bus ride took 47 minutes. She sat near the back, window seat. Watched Riverside blur past, the corner store with the hand-painted sign, the fur church with the marquee that always had a typo, the block where Darius's gym sat between a laundromat and a phone case shop. Then the streets widened. The buildings got further apart. The cars got newer and quieter. And then the bus turned on up Harlow Road. And the school appeared through the window like something out of the brochure they'd sent after the scholarship letter. She had studied that brochure, memorized it the way you memorize the niceness out of a place before you walk into it for the first time. But the photo hadn't caught how the building sat, how it spread low and confident across manicured ground, like it had never once needed to prove anything. Red brick, old trees whose roots had been growing here longer than most of the students' parents had been alive. A circular front drive where cars were already pulling up, sleek and silent, dropping off kids who moved through the morning air, like they owned not just the school, but the weather around it. She got off the bus, stood at the bottom of the front steps. There was a sign above the main entrance, brass letters mounted into stone: excellence, integrity, community. She read those 3 words, thought about what they would have to mean for her, specifically in this place for the next year. Then she went in. Inside smelled like polished wood and something faintly floral, the particular clean smell of a place that had never had to worry about its heat. The hallways were wide, lockers painted in 2 sheets of navy. The floors threw back pale gold light from long windows above. Students moved in clusters, finishing each other's sentences, reaching across each other. All of them fluent in a language Zara didn't speak, the language of people who had always known they belonged here, who had never once stood at the bottom of a staircase and had to calculate whether they had the right to go up. Nobody looked at her directly. Or rather, people looked at her the way people look at a new painting hung in a room where the furniture doesn't quite match it. A glance, an adjustment, decision to engage. She found her homeroom on the 2nd floor, room 214. Sat in the back corner because that's where she always sits, not from shyness, but from understanding, learned early and reinforced often, that the back corner was where you could see everything without being surrounded by it. The teacher called roll. Her name came last because Coleman sorted that way, alphabetically last, always the name at the bottom of every list she'd ever been on. When her name was called, she said here, and a few heads turned. She opened her notebook, started writing the date. And that was when she felt it, from across the room, from the 3rd row on the left, a gaze that was different from the rest. Not curious, not dismissive, calculating. She looked up just for a second, found it. A boy she didn't have a name for yet. Broad shoulders, easy posture, the kind of face that expected to be smiled at. Dark blazer, collar open 1 button more than the dress code probably allowed, which meant he knew exactly where the line was and had placed himself 1 step past it on purpose. He was leaning toward the boy beside him, saying something low. The boy beside, sharp features, rest hands, glanced at her, smirked, looked away. The first boy didn't smirk. He just looked at her the way someone looks at a chessboard after the opening move, noting position, noting possibility. Then he turned back to the front of the room like nothing had happened. She wrote the date in her notebook. She underlined it. She would learn their names soon. Preston Hale, Jace Donner. She would learn them the way you learn the names of things you need to keep track of. The rest of that first morning was fine, which meant nothing bad happened, which at Harlow, she would understand quickly, was its own kind of fine temporary, existing in the space before a system decided what to do with you. She found her classes, sat, listened, answered when called on. Her answers were correct. She knew they were correct before she said them, which was the thing nobody ever talked about with scholarship students, the constant double-checking before speaking, because being right wasn't enough. You had to be right in a way that didn't make the room uncomfortable. She managed it, mostly. In 2nd period, she answered a question about supply chain economics that the teacher had clearly expected no one to get. The teacher raised her eyebrows, said, "Good." And from the row behind her came a sound, not loud enough to be a statement, just loud enough to be a signal. A quiet exhale that had the shape of a laugh inside it. She kept her eyes forward, wrote the answer in her notes, kept going. Lunch was its own education. The cafeteria at Harlow wasn't a cafeteria. It was a dining hall, which is just a cafeteria that knows what it wants to be when it grows up. Round tables, actual chairs, a menu board in chalkboard font. A salad bar with 3 kinds of lettuce and avocados that had been halved and fanned out like someone had arranged them with care. Zara got a tray, moved through the line, looked at the tables. Every one of them was already a completed sentence with no room for another clause. She found a spot near the wall. Not alone exactly, other students nearby, but with their chairs angled away the way strangers sit in waiting rooms. She sat, ate, watched the table in the center, the one where chairs pulled toward each other instead of away, watched Preston talk, hands still, voice low, but everyone around him leaning in. Watched Jace say something that made 2 girls laugh, not because it was funny, but because laughing when Jace spoke was the correct response at that table. And these were people who gave correct responses. And then Preston looked up, across the whole dining hall, to her. Just a moment of contact, the kind that said, "I see you, I've noted you, I've filed you." Then he looked back at his table and said something, and Jace laughed. Zara ate her lunch. She thought about what Darius had told her 2 nights ago. She couldn't sleep when she'd called him at 11 and he'd picked up on the second ring. The ones you should worry about aren't the loud ones. The loud ones are just noise. Watch the quiet ones. The ones who already know what they're going to do before they start. She filed that away. Dean Briggs came to her 3 days in, not dramatically, not waiting outside her classroom or sending a summons to the office. He simply appeared in the hall between fourth and fifth period, moving with the unhurried authority of a man who had been in these halls long enough to know every creak in the floorboards and had stopped being surprised by any of them. He was black, tall, 55 maybe, with a face that had lines in it not from stress but from the kind of sustained attention that leaves marks over time, dark slacks, a jacket that fit it right, the kind of man who looked carefully pressed, not for appearances but for precision. He said, "Coleman." She stopped. He looked at her for a moment, not assessing, just seeing there was a difference. He said, "I read your scholarship file." She waited. Top 2% in the state for applied mathematics. Reading comprehension above the 98th percentile. 3 letters of recommendation, all of them unsolicited. He paused. You know what unsolicited means? It means they wrote them before I asked. It means they couldn't help themselves. He held her gaze. Don't let anyone in this building make you forget what those numbers say about you. And then he walked away. She stood in the hall for a second after he was gone. She went to fifth period. But she kept thinking about the word anyone. Some people. Anyone. Like he already knew it was coming from more than one direction. The first thing they did was small. They always start small. Week 2. Group project for AP Economics. 4 students per group assigned by the teacher. Zara was paired with a girl named Brecken and a boy named Tate and a fourth name she didn't recognize. The fourth person never came. She found Brecken and Tate in the library. Already set up. Papers spread. A shared document open on Tate's laptops. She sat down, said, "Hey, I'm Zara. I'm in your group." Brecken looked at her, then at Tate. Tate said, "Oh yeah, we kind of already divided it up." She said, "Okay, what do I have?" "A beat." Then Brecken said, "We thought the fourth person wasn't coming." She said, "I'm here now." Another beat longer than the first. Tate said, "We're pretty far in. Maybe you can do the conclusion section?" She said, "The conclusion for a project you've been working on for 4 days." He said, "It's not big section." She said, "Okay, because what else do you say?" She had promised herself to give every situation exactly 2 chances before deciding what it was. She wrote the conclusion section, spent 2 hours on it that night, made it strong enough that it elevated everything around it. The grade came back a week later. The teacher noted that the project showed uneven contribution levels and docked 2 points from Zara's individual score. For not contributing evenly, she held the note, set it down. 1 chance gone, 1 left. In the 3rd week, Jace started. Nothing you point to directly, just sounds. Just the way words can be used like small stones, dropped near you, not at you. So there's always a reason why it didn't quite happen. During a class discussion on American literature, she made a point about language and access. A real point. The teacher nodded, and from behind her, Jace's voice pitched just low enough to need leaning toward. She must have gotten that from Riverside's AP curriculum. A few seats over, a muffled sound that was definitely a laugh. The teacher didn't react, maybe didn't hear, maybe heard and chose not to. She kept her eyes forward, wrote the comment in her notes, not as a complaint, as a record. In gym during a relay drill, Jace ran a shoulder into hers, 3 degrees too hard to be accidental, 4 degrees too casual to be intentional. She stumbled, caught herself. He was already past her. "My bad," he said. Didn't look back. She didn't respond. On a Thursday morning, she found a piece of paper in her locker. She'd noticed the lock was easy to pop her first week and had been meaning to report it. Now she was glad she hadn't yet. Might as well learn what it was being used for first. The paper said, "Riverside belongs in Riverside." She read it, folded it, put it in her pocket, walked to class. That afternoon, she saw Maya Osi in the hall. Maya was the only other black girl in her grade, maybe in the upper school. She hadn't counted yet. Pretty in a controlled way, the kind of pretty that came from effort and intention. She moved through Harlow like she'd learned its physics by trial and error over 2 years and had finally stopped being surprised. Maya looked at her phone, looked back, said quietly, "I saw your locker this morning, Zara." "Okay." "Maya, don't report it." "Zara, why not?" Maya hesitated, just for a second. Just long enough, Zara said. Have you tried? Maya didn't answer, and that was the answer. They looked at each other in the hallway of Harlow Academy, two girls who had come to this place from different angles and arrived at some complicated position. Inside a door that wasn't built for them, standing in a hallway that didn't quite know what to do with their presence, trying to figure out whether the right strategy was to fight or to wait, or to find some third option that nobody had named yet. Maya looked away first, said, "Just to be careful," and walked off. Zara reported it anyway. She found the administrative office, filled out the beige form on a clipboard, the kind that existed to create the appearance of a system without quite being one. She wrote down exactly what she'd found. Locker number, date, time. She had kept the note in a small plastic bag because she'd put it in her pocket, walked half a block, realized that was wrong, and fixed it. She wasn't sure if bagging it was the right thing, but it seemed like the right thing. The woman behind the desk, Ms. Hensley, according to the nameplate, took the form, said she would look into it. Said it with the expression of someone who has repeated that phrase so many times it has become a sound rather than a sentence. Zara said, "What does looking into it involve?" Ms. Hensley said, "We take all reports seriously." Zara said, "I know. I'm asking what the process looks like." Ms. Hensley smiled at her with practiced patience. "We'll review it and follow up." Zara said, "Thank you." She left. 2 days later, Preston was waiting by her locker, not at his own locker, not walking past, standing near hers specifically, holding his phone like he was just waiting for a text, just happening to be here, nothing premeditated about any of this. He smiled when he saw her. It was a good smile. She had to give him that. The kind that made you want to believe in it, he said. "Hey, Zara, right?" She said, "You know my name." A pause, small amusement. "Isn't that fair? Yeah, I know your name." He pushed off the locker, easy, hands in pockets. "I heard you were having some trouble adjusting. If you need anything, a study group, someone to show you around, my door's open." She looked at him, past the smile, past the easy posture, said, "How did you know I filed a report?" He didn't flinch. She gave him that too. He was good at not flinching. He just tilted his head a faint shift, said, "Harlow's a small community. People talk." She looked at him for one more second. Then she opened her locker, got what she needed, closed it, said, "Thanks for the offer," and she walked to class. But she understood now. The form she'd filled out had passed through hands. Somewhere between the form and the follow-up, someone had made a call. The system wasn't broken. The system was working exactly as designed. She called Darius that night. He picked up on the second ring. She could hear the gym in the background, the low rhythm of music, someone sim on the speed bag. She said, "The administration reports to the people with money." He said, "Yeah." She said, "I filed a report and they told the person I filed against." He said, "Yeah." A pause. She said, So what do I do?" He was quiet for a moment. The speed bag slowed in the background. He said, "You find out who inside that building doesn't owe them anything. There's always somebody. Takes time." She said goodnight, hung up, sat on her bed and thought about Briggs, about the word anyone, about the way he said, "Don't let anyone in this building," not "don't let them," not "watch out for those boys." Anyone. Like he'd been watching for longer than she had. She opened her notebook, wrote the date at the top of a new page. Underneath it in small, careful print, day 14. Locker incident. Form filed. Information passed to Preston Hale within 48 hours. Ms. Hensley, front desk. She wrote it down because writing it down made it real, made it a record, made it something that couldn't later be told to her, she'd imagined. She closed the notebook and put it in her backpack. She was going to need more pages. Week 4 started quietly. Too quietly, she recognized that now. The kind of quiet that in Riverside meant something was about to get loud. Preston had pulled back slightly, not away, just to a distance where nothing could be pointed to. No more hallway conversations. Just the occasional awareness of him at the edge of a room, noting position. Jace had pulled back too, which should have felt like relief. Didn't. She told herself to wait. She waited, and then came the Thursday of the 4th week. Art class, second to last period. Open assignment, bring your own idea, self-directed work. She was doing architectural drawing, a technique she'd taught herself from online videos over the summer. Precise angles, clean line work. She had her pencil, her ruler, her set square arranged on the table in front of her. The room was mid-afternoon quiet. Pencils on paper, the heating system clicking. 2 people murmuring near the window. She was focused, which meant her attention was on the page in front of her, which the back of her neck was unguarded. which meant the degree of guard she'd been keeping every single day for 4 weeks had slipped just slightly at exactly the wrong moment. She heard the sound first, soft, fabric shifting close, then a tug, sharp, at the back of her head, just below the crown. And she knew, before she could process it, before the information had fully assembled, she knew from the feeling alone. From the changed weight on the left side of her neck, from the sudden cool air touching a place where there had been no air. She put her hand up, felt the end of a braid, clean cut, loose in her fingers. Behind her, Jace's voice. "There you go. Lighter now, right?" She sat completely still. Her hand stayed at the back of her head, fingers around the severed end. And everything in the room went to a very particular kind of quiet that had nothing to do with sound. Somewhere across the room, Preston's low laugh. Someone near the windows pulled in a sharp breath. Jace said, "Don't make it weird. It's just hair." She sat there holding the braid in her hand. The braid she had tended that morning. The braid she'd started at 4 in the morning. The braid that was, in some version of itself that stretched back further than she could track, the shape of her grandmother's hands working through her hair on a Sunday, passing down something that had no other name except "This is who we are." And she thought in rapid succession 3 things. Her grandmother's voice, "Start clean or don't start at all." Then Darius, "Observe first, react second." Then her own voice, something below the rules, something older. "I have absorbed every small thing. I filed their forms. I swallowed their smiles. I walked away from everything I had the right to be angry about. I gave them every chance I promised myself I would give, and they still cut my hair." She stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the quiet, loud enough that several heads turned. She turned around, looked at Jace. He was still smiling, the art room scissors hanging loose from 2 fingers, small and silver, the kind every student at the table had access to. He was holding up the inch of braid he'd cut like it was a joke prop, like this was a punchline they'd arrived at together. She looked at him. Then she looked at the rest of the room. All 11 other students. Every one of them looking back. Every one of them wearing the frozen expression of people who understood that something had just happened and had not yet decided whether they were going to name it. She looked at each of them, one by one. Not fast, not with anger, just with presence. Making sure each of them understood that she saw them seeing this, that they were not going to get to be invisible in this moment the way they had been invisible for 4 weeks while smaller things happened. Then she looked back at Jace, said nothing, just looked at him the way you look at something you have finished calculating. His smile flickered, just at the edges, just enough. The teacher was in the back corner with a grade book, not looking. The room held its breath, and Zara stood in the middle of it with the separate braid in her hand, and everything she had been holding still for 4 weeks balanced on a single breath. She made a decision, not a reaction, not something that got away from her. A decision. She hit him. 1 breath. 1 second where everything went quiet and clear in the way Darius had always described. Not anger, something colder than anger, something that felt less like feeling and more like math. She ran the numbers in that single second. 11 witnesses, 1 teacher not watching. Scissors in his hand, braid in hers. 4 weeks of documented, deliberate, carefully constructed cruelty that had just made itself undeniable. The math was simple. She hit him. 1 clean right hook. Not a swing, a short, tight rotation from the hip. Shoulder into it exactly the way Dedgerant had drilled her. Not for power, but for precision. Not for damage, but for accuracy. The knuckle caught Jace on the cheekbone. His head snapped sideways. The scissors left his fingers and skittered across the floor. He went back into the supply table, and the whole thing lurched forward, and 3 jars of brushes hit the tile and rolled. The sound was ugly. It was also the most honest sound that room had produced in 4 weeks. Jace sat down hard against the base of the table, 1 hand covering his face. Not unconscious, just recalibrating. Just realizing that the thing he had believed about this moment, the version where she absorbed it and stayed seated and became smaller, was not the version that was happening. Preston moved. Not fast. He was too controlled for fast. He came off his stool with the measured urgency of someone executing a plan, a hand going to her shoulder, the beginning of a grip. She grabbed the wrist, turned it over, pressed the elbow joint down against the edge of the table beside her. Not enough to break. Enough that he made a sound he hadn't planned on making. Enough that his knees bent, and he sat down too. Then she let go, stepped back, hands at her sides, breathing even. 11 students, all frozen. Several phones partially out, fumbling, unsure about whether to record or look away or help, and not knowing who they would be helping if they did. One girl near the windows had both hands over her mouth. A boy in the back row had pushed his chair away from his table as if distance was a form of non-involvement. None of them spoke. The teacher, Ms. Aldrin, who had been in the back corner with a grade book, who had seen somewhere else entirely for the 60 seconds it took for everything to change, looked up, looked at Jace on the floor, looked at Preston crouched beside a table, looked at Zara standing in the center of it, said, What happened? Nobody answered, because nobody wanted to be the one who answered, because answering meant being part of it, because being part of it had costs that watching from the edge apparently did not. Zara looked down at the braid in her left hand. She had not let it go through any of it. Not through the decision, not through the hook, not through Preston's wrist. She looked at it for a moment. The clean-cut end, the frayed strands, the thing that had been part of her this morning and was now something she was holding. She set it gently on the desk in front of her, like it deserved that, like it was something that should be put down with care rather than dropped. She picked up her backpack, walked to the door. Ms. Aldrin said, "You need to. Wait, you can't." She was already in the hall. She did not run. Opt was for people who didn't know where they were going. She knew exactly where she was going. She walked down the second-floor hallway at the same pace she walked every day, took the stairs at the far end, came out on the ground floor, turned left toward the administrative wing, Dean Briggs's office. Third door on the right. She knocked 30 seconds. He opened the door, looked at her hands, looked at her face. Read all of it in about 2 seconds the way someone reads something they've been expecting. Said, "Come in." She came in. He closed the door, didn't tell her to sit, moved to his desk, turned his chair, sat, looked at her standing in the middle of his office, said, "Tell me what happened," she told him. All of it, in sequence, at the pace of someone who wants to get the order right, the class, the sound, the tug, her hand going up, the braid in her hand, Jace's face, what she did, what Preston did, what she did after that. When she finished, Briggs was quiet. Then he said, "The scissors, art room scissors. He got them from the supply cabinet, before class." She paused, thought back. He was already at the supply cabinet when I came in. I didn't think about it at the time. Briggs nodded slowly. He planned it, yes. He looked at his desk, at nothing specific on his desk, then back at her. He said, "There's a camera in that room, top corner, above the supply shelves. As it's been since last year, it was installed for inventory, not incidents. Most people don't know it's there." She waited. "I'm going to pull that footage before the end of the day, before anyone else thinks to." She said, "Can they make it disappear?" He said, "If I don't move first." "Yes." She nodded. He opened his desk, pulled out a small notebook, wire-bound, 50 pages, nothing remarkable about it. She had it on the desk, glanced at him. He said, "You've been keeping records." "Yes, in your own notebook." "Yes, keep doing that. But use this one too." He pushed it toward her. Different place, different copy. If something happens to one, there's another. Yes, she picked it up. Plain cover, 50 blank pages. "Dad," she said, "why are you helping me?" He looked at her for a moment, the kind of look that wasn't deciding what to say, but deciding how much of what was already true to say out loud. He said, "Because I've been in this building 12 years, and for 12 years I have watched this system protect the same people. Every time about myself, I needed more evidence, more documentation, more certainty that it would work before I moved." He paused. "You've been here 4 weeks, and they cut your hair in a classroom. I don't need more evidence." The office was quiet. She said, "What happens now?" He said, "You get suspended. 5 days. That's what happens when you hit someone at Harlow, regardless of context. I can't prevent that. I know. What I can prevent is what they try to do after. They're going to call this a pattern. They're going to pull your record from your old school. They're going to build a story where you're the problem, and everything that happened to you is either exaggerated or provoked." He looked at her steadily. "They're going to try to make the story about you," she said. "Let them." He looked at her. She said, "If I'm the center seat, everything that happened to me is part of it too. You can't make me the story without making what they did to me the story." Briggs was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You've been thinking about this," she said. "Since week 1, something shifted in his face."
Not surprise exactly. Something's closer to recognition.
he said. Get through the 5 days. Keep writing. And when something crosses a line, come back here. She picked up her backpack, he said. Coleman. She stopped. The footage from that room. I'll have it secured by morning. Whatever they try next, I have what's on that tape. She nodded, walked out. Her mother was in the parking lot 16 minutes later. Elaine Coleman had gotten the call at work, had left mid-shift, was standing beside the car in her scrubs with her arms folded and her face doing the thing it did when she was beyond tired, the expression that didn't have a name because no one had needed to name it until Elaine Coleman existed, and needed it several times a week. Zara got in the passenger seat. Elaine got in the driver's seat, started the car. They drove for 20 minutes without a word. Through the Harlow streets, back onto the wider roads, past the point where the cars got older and the buildings got closer, and the air felt like somewhere that didn't need to prove anything. Back into Riverside. Back into the sound of the city being itself without apology. Finally, Elaine said, 5 days, Zara. Yes, see Lessing, Slassing after that, and that silence was the hardest thing about the whole day. Harder than the braid on the desk, harder than the 5-day suspension. Harder than Jace's smirk, or Preston's careful positioning, or the 11 people who had watched and said nothing. Because her mother was angry, and she couldn't tell if the anger was aimed at what had been done to her or at what she had done in response. And she didn't ask, because some questions, if you ask them at the wrong moment, broke something that took a long time to rebuild. Darius showed up at 8 that evening. No phone call, just a knock. She opened the door and he was standing there in a gray sweatshirt, gym bag over one shoulder, holding a protein bar out to her like it was a peace offering. She took it. He came in, looked at the apartment, looked at her mother's closed bedroom door, looked at Zara's, said, "Get your shoes." They went down to the building's garage. He pushed 2 cars over to make a space and hung a portable bag from a hook in the ceiling. It went up in 10 seconds, which meant he had used this spot before. He taped her hands without asking. She let him. They worked, not sparring, just drills, jab, cross, hook. Over and over, her shoulders burning, her breathing finding its rhythm. The thing that had been wound tight in her chest since that afternoon, slowly, incrementally, beginning to loosen, not disappear. Just distribute itself more evenly, spread to where it could be carried instead of accumulated. Then Darius dropped the mitts, sat on the hood of someone's old Buick, looked at her, said, "You hit clean." She, "I know." He, "Both of them." She, "Yes." He nodded. "Now what it?" Sat beside him, unwrapped one hand slowly, said, "Briggs has the footage from the classroom. He's securing it before they can touch it. Darius, you trust him?" A real pause, not a polite one. She, "I think he's been waiting for something to do something with. I think I gave him the thing." Darius, "That's not trust." She, "No, but it's enough to work with." He nodded. What else? She told him about the notebooks. Pattern she'd been watching. The way her report had been rerouted back to Preston within 2 days. The way small things had been structured to leave no single mark large enough to point to, but which added up over 4 weeks into something that had a clear shape. He listened all the way to the end. He always did. When she finished, he said, "You need someone outside the school, someone they can't call." Briggs mentioned a journalist before all of this, a week ago. Said her name in passing, Nina Reeves. "Darius, you know her?" She, "No, but I'll find her." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You didn't lose control today." She, "No, he, I know that. That's not what I'm asking." He paused. "Are you okay?" She thought about the question, actually thought about it. The parking garage around them was quiet, oil stains on concrete, the distant sound of the street above, a strip of yellow light under the door to the stairwell. She said, "I will be." He said, "Good enough." He lined off the hood. Started taking the bag down, she said. "Darius," he stopped, she said, "the way it felt. When I made the decision, it wasn't like anger." He waited. She said, "It was like clarity, like everything went quiet, and I just knew." He looked at her. Something in his face settled. He said, "Yeah, that's what I've been trying to teach you for 6 years." He pulled the bag down. Most people never feel it. They react before it gets there. He shouldered the bag. You waited for the quiet. That's the difference. She stood in this parking garage for a minute after he was gone, just standing, just breathing. Then she went upstairs and opened her notebook and wrote for an hour. The parents came on day 2. Briggs described it to her later with the persistence of someone who had been taking his own notes. 3 families, one after the other, as if they had coordinated arrival times, which they had. Preston's father first, Gregory Hale. Corporate lawyer, the kind who wore his profession on how he occupied a room, spreading into every available corner without seeming to try. He came in with a legal pad and asked 6 questions in the time most people asked 2. And each question was structured so that the only available answer made his position stronger. He cited precedent. He cited the code of conduct. He cited community standards. Then Jace's parents. Quiet, titter. More frightened of exposure, of things becoming public, of the particular discomfort of having to sit in a room and have their son's behavior discussed by someone with the authority to document it. His mother cried. Briggs said he understood it. He also noted that the crying seemed more about inconvenience than about what had actually happened in that classroom. Then a school board member. An actual board member called in on a Tuesday afternoon because Gregory Hale had made 2 phone calls before he walked through the door. They all wanted the same thing, not a longer suspension, not mediation, expulsion, record marked, scholarship revoked. Zara Coleman removed from the story entirely. Briggs had sat across from each group in the long conference room that always smelled faintly of old coffee, and had said the same thing to each of them, in different words chosen for each audience. I am continuing my investigation. Not, your son did something wrong. Not, the footage shows what actually happened. Just, I am continuing my investigation because he had the tape and he hadn't played it yet, and a card you haven't played is still in your hand. On day 3, the headmistress called him in. Dr. Caroline Marsh, 61. A woman who had built her career on being the most reasonable person in any room, which meant she was skilled at making agreement sound like it was mutual when it wasn't. She had a document waiting on her desk when he arrived. 3 pages, behavioral assessment, his signature line at the bottom. The document described Zisara as Dr. Pocket put of aggressive behavior inconsistent with Harlow Academy's values and community standards. He read it twice, set it down, said, I won't sign this. Marsh said, Walter, he said, I won't sign a document that describes a student as a behavioral threat without any reference to the incident that preceded her response. Marsh said, the preceding incident hasn't been formally substantiated, he said. I have footage. A pause. Something moved behind her eyes. Recalculation. She said, footage from an inventory camera is a question of context and chain of custody. And he said, would you like to watch it right now? She looked at him. He looked at her. The documents sat on the desks between them like a third person in the room. She said, carefully, I need you to consider your position here. All 12 years. An exceptional record. The families involved have been central to this institution in ways that affect everything, programs, facilities, staff positions. He said, I know who the families are. She said, then you understand what I'm asking. He said, I understand exactly what you're asking. He stood up, left the document on her desk, walked back to his office, sat down, looked at his phone for a long moment. Then he called Nina Reeves. Zara came back to school on day 6. She walked through the front entrance at the same time she always arrived. Same backpack. Same 4 braids. She had retended the cut braid the night before. Sitting on her bedroom floor for 2 hours rebuilding it from what remained because she was not walking back into that building with an absence on the left side of her head. Same pace down the hall. The hallway adjusted around her. Not dramatically. Just people moved. Conversations shifted angle. A teacher, she didn't have found something on her clipboard that required immediate attention as Zara passed. The geometry of the space rearranged itself subtly to create a margin around her. She noticed all of it, wrote none of it down because she didn't need to. It was the kind of thing that lived in the body rather than the notebook, the physical record of how a space feels when it has decided what you are. She went to class, took notes, answered when called on. After school near the east exit that most students didn't use, Maya caught up with her, walked beside her for half a hallway without speaking, then said, I've been at Harlow 2 years. Zara, I know. Maya, I learned what to absorb, what to ignore, how to be small enough that they don't bother. She kept walking. Maya, I told myself that was strategy, a pause. I was in the over. I saw the whole thing. Before and during, Zara stopped walking, turned, looked at her. Maya said, I did nothing. I have been doing nothing for 2 years. She met Zara's eyes. Her jaw was set in the way of someone who has decided something and is now executing the decision before they can talk themselves out of it. What do you need from me? It was a direct question, no flourishes, no redemption speech. Zara said, write down what you saw, date, time in your own words. It's not summarized, exactly what you saw, everything you remember. Maya, okay, Zara, and anything from the past 2 years. If you've been watching, Maya, I have a lot from the past 2 years. Zara, write that too. Maya nodded. They stood in the east corridor of Harlow with the late afternoon light coming in low through the windows at the end. And there was nothing else to say, so neither of them said anything else. They just turned and went in their separate directions. Raceman Stubbs found her on day 8. She had seen him around the building since her first week, the way you see people who carry maintenance equipment, which is to say not quite seeing them, registering their presence without registering them as people. She had noticed herself doing this and had actively worked against it, making eye contact, nodding, noting names. Raymond's name she'd read off his work shirt sometime in week 2. He sat down across from her in the cafeteria at the end of the lunch period after most students had cleared, set his cart against the wall, sat like a man who had made up his mind about something and was acting before he could reverse himself. He said, it was in the ceiling, she said. What? He said. Above the art room. There's a maintenance crawl space up there. A section of ventilation duct has been leaking for 3 months and I've been trying to seal it. I was up there when it happened. He paused. I had my phone out as a flash. When I heard things below me that didn't sound right, I started recording. He reached into his pocket, set his phone on the table between them. 2 minutes and 22 seconds. She looked at the phone, looked at him. He unlocked it. She pressed play. The angle was from above and slightly left through a gap in the vent covering, looking down into the room. Closer than the inventory camera in the corner, clearer. You could see Jace move to the supply cabinet before the class settled. You could see him take the scissors. You could see him look across the room at Preston. You could see Preston's slight nod, small almost nothing, but there, unmistakable. You could see Jace walk toward Zara from behind while she was working. She watched 30 seconds, set it down, said, "Why are you showing me this now? It's been 8 days." He looked at his hands, large, calloused hands, the hands of someone who had spent decades fixing things that belonged to other people. He said, "My daughter goes to this school, junior year. She's here on a partial scholarship." He paused. She came home the night of us the incident, and Bay calls me was being about it, the version that was circulating, and I sat with it for a week, trying to decide whether it was my place to get involved. Another pause. Then I thought about my daughter. About what I would want someone to do if it was her in that classroom. Zara waited, he said. I can't promise I won't be scared. I am scared. These people have ways of making things difficult that don't announce themselves as retaliation, she said. I know, he said. My job, my daughter's situation here. She said, I know, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. She meant it. This is your call. But I'll tell you this. They're building a story where I snapped, where I'm dangerous, where nothing that happened before matters because of what I did after. If that's the version that stands, she didn't finish the sentence. Raymond picked up his phone, looked at it, said, There's a journalist. I heard Dean Briggs on the phone in his office a few days ago. A woman named Nina. Zah said, Nina Reeves. He looked at her. You know her, she said. Not yet, but I'm going to. He sat with that. Then he locked his phone and put it back in his pocket. He said, I'm not saying yes yet, but I'm not saying no. She nodded. He stood, picked up his cart. She said, Raymond. He stopped, looked back. She said, thank you for showing me. He didn't answer. He pushed the cart through the kitchen door, and it swung shut behind him, and she sat alone at the end of the cafeteria with the afternoon light coming in flat and cold through the high windows. She opened her notebook, wrote the date, wrote Raymond Stubbs, full sequence, Preston's not visible. She closed it, kept going. Nina Reeves called on day 9, unnumbered. Zara almost didn't pick up. She picked up. Is this Zara Coleman? Who's asking? Nina Reeves. I write about education for the Tribune. Dean Briggs gave me your number and told me to tell you that so you'd know it was real. Zara stood up from the kitchen table where she'd been working, said, Okay. Nina said, I'd like to meet. No recorder, nothing on record unless you choose it. I just want to hear what happened. They met the next morning at a diner 4 blocks from Zara's apartment. Nina Reeves was 31, with a face that had learned to receive information without broadcasting reaction. She ordered coffee, didn't touch it, listened. Zara talked. She laid it out in order. Day 1 through day 28. The group project, the form, the note in the locker, Preston in the hall with his good smile 2 days after she filed the report. The relay drill in gym. The sounds in class that were designed to be unverifiable. The accumulation, the entire careful, deliberate accumulation of things that left no single mark large enough to point to, but which, together, had a clear shape. And then the classroom. The sound, her hand going up the braid. Nina listened to all of it without interrupting. When it was done, she was quiet for a moment. Turned her coffee cup once, then said, "You kept records." "Yes." "From when?" "Week 2, day 3. Nina looked at her. "Why that early?" Zara said, "Because I grew up in a place where nobody believed you when you said something happened. So I learned to write it down before I needed to prove it." Nina didn't respond to that immediately. She sat with it. Then she said, "I don't do stories about incidents. I do stories about systems. Which means if I find what I think I'm going to find, this won't just be about you." Zara said, "Good. Nina, it might get harder before it gets easier." "Zara, I know." Nina looked at her for a moment. The look of someone deciding whether to trust what they're seeing. Said, "For me 48 hours." She came back in 46. Same diner, same corner. She had a folder this time, not thick but dense. The kind that comes from compression rather than absence. She set it on the table between them. Said 3 cases, 3 years, 3 different students, different incidents, different forms. But the same names, Preston Hale, Jace Donner, and in 2 cases a 3rd student who has since transferred. All 3 students filed formal complaints. All 3 complaints were closed within 1 week. All 3 closures carry the same administrative signature. Zaza opened the folder. "Read the top page." Said, "Marsh." Nina every time. Zara kept reading. Then she looked up. Nina said, "I found one of the 3 students. She graduated in the spring. She's at college now. Her name is Deja. What happened to her here was different from what happened to you, but not different enough." Paused. "She's willing to go on record." Zara said, "What did she say when you asked her?" Nina was quiet for a second. Then she said she'd been waiting for someone to stay. The diner was warm. Someone's radio at the counter playing something low, the smell of coffee and old upholstery, and a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning that had no idea what was being decided at a corner table by 2 women who had not existed to each other 2 days ago. Zara said, "This is bigger than me." Nina, "Yes, that's what I've been trying to tell you." Zara said, "So what do we need?" Nina leaned forward. "The footage from Briggs, whatever Raymond decides, Deja's account, your records, Maya's written statement if she'll give one. And time. I need to verify everything before anything goes public because the moment it does, they will come at all of it hard and fast, and we need it to be airtight." Zara, "How long?" Nina, 2, maybe 3 weeks. Zara closed the folder, slid it back across the table, picked up her coffee, cold by now, drank it anyway. Said, "They're going to keep pushing while we build this." Nina, "Yes." She set the cup down, opened her notebook. They tumble. Nina looked at it. Pages of small, careful handwriting, dates in the margins, names circled, times underlined. Nina said, "You started this in week 2, Zara." "Week 2, day 3. Nina looked at the notebook for a long moment, then looked at her, said, "Don't stop." She went home, ate dinner, sat at the kitchen table and wrote for an hour. She wrote about Raymond's hands on the tables in the 2 minutes and 22 seconds, and that was almost nothing but wasn't. She wrote about Deja Warren, whose name she had just learned, who had left this school carrying something she hadn't been able to put down until now. She wrote about Maya and the East Corridor, and what it looks like when someone decides to stop being afraid in real time, right in front of you. Then she wrote, in the margin, at the bottom of the last page, "They think the most dangerous thing about me is my temper. They don't understand. The most dangerous thing about me is my patience." She closed the notebook. She had work to do, and she was not done. 3 weeks. Not 3 weeks because of waiting. 3 weeks of work, the kind that doesn't look like anything from the outside but is everything on the inside. Zara went to class, took notes, answered questions correctly and without performance, walked the hallways of Harlow with her 4 braids and her straight back, and said nothing to anyone about what was being assembled in the background, piece by piece. The way you build something meant to last. Nobody knew how close it was. That was the point. Briggs worked mornings. He came in at 6, before the building filled, before the office unlocked its windows, and the cleaning crew finished the upper floor. He sat at his desk with the door closed and his personal laptop open, not the school-issued one, his own, backed up to a drive he kept at home. And he organized everything the way you organize something you are going to present to people who will be looking for any reason not to believe it. Chronological, cross-referenced, documented twice, 3 students over 3 years, 6 formal complaints, all 6 closed within a week of filing, all 6 signed off by Dr. Caroline Marsh. All 6 followed within 30 days by the complaining student's departure from Harlow, transfer requests, scholarship complications, one student who simply stopped coming and was never formally withdrawn, as if the school had been content to let the absence speak for itself. He printed everything twice, 1 copy in a folder in his desk, 1 copy in his car. He had learned, 12 years into this building, that documents had a way of becoming unavailable when they became inconvenient. On a Tuesday morning, 10 days into the 3 weeks, he stopped Zara in the hallway before first period, said, "We're almost ready," she said. "Almost isn't there?" He said, "No, but it's close." He looked at her with the particular steadiness someone who has stopped asking for permission. Raymond made his decision. She absorbed that. Nodded once. He said, "Nina's piece is written. She's waiting on editorial clearance. Once that comes, we move to a formal hearing. The district representative has already been contacted." She said, "How did the district get involved?" He said, "Nina contacted them directly as part of her verification process. Once Holt, the district rep, saw what Nina was looking at, she requested a formal review independent of the school's internal process." He paused. "March doesn't know about Holt yet." Zara said. "When?" He said. "End of the week." She looked at him. A long look, the kind that was also a question. She said, "You've been here 12 years, and you've never pushed like this before." It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact placed on the table between them. He looked back at her. "No," he said, "I haven't." She waited. He said, "I told myself I needed more, always more, before I could move. More evidence, more certainty, more protection for my position before I risked it." He said it the way someone says something they've already finished grieving. "I was afraid of what they could do to me, the job I'd built, the position." He paused. "You came here, and in 4 weeks they cut your hair, and I realized I had been waiting for the right moment for 12 years, and the right moment is not something that arrives. You have to build it," she said. "You could still lose your job." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you're still doing it." He said, "Yes." She picked up her backpack, said, "End of the week." He said, "End of the week." Prest found her on Wednesday. She had known he would come. Not the specific moment. She hadn't known he would. He picked the east parking lot at 20 minutes past 3, in the particular flat light of a Wednesday afternoon that made everything look like it was waiting for rain. But she had known, with the certainty of someone who has learned to read pressure building in a system, that he would come before the end. He was leaning into the door, arms folded. "No, Jace, no, just Preston." She stopped walking, looked at him. He pushed off the car, came toward her with his hands open, a gesture that meant different things depending on who was making it. On Preston, it meant, "I am being reasonable. This is a conversation between people who can work things out, nothing adversarial here." He said, "I just want to talk." She said, "Okay." He seemed slightly surprised she'd agreed. He had come prepared for her to walk away. He said, "This has gotten out of hand." She said, "Has it?" He said, "Look." He stopped, reformulated. She could see him doing it, the small, visible adjustment of someone whose plan is making contact with reality and finding the fit imperfect. "My family wants to make this right for you. A scholarship at a different school, a better one. Honestly, better resources, stronger network, full tuition, housing covered. Your record here would be clean. Complete clean exit," she said. "A clean exit," he said. "You'd be taken care of. Long term. There are connections at several universities," she said. "Preston." He stopped. She said, "Do you understand what you just said to me?" Uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. Just slightly, just enough. He said, "I'm offering you," she said. "You're offering me a reward for going away, which means you know that if I stay, something bad happens to you." She held his gaze without effort. "You just told me you know you're wrong. You know what happened in that classroom was wrong. You're trying to pay me enough that stay quiet." His jaw tightened, she said. "I've been here 6 weeks. I've had things thrown at me and my grades manipulated, and a piece of my hair cut off with a pair of scissors in a room full of people who watched it happen. And your family's answer to all of that is to offer me a nicer scholarship somewhere else. He said, I'm trying to make this better, she said. No, her voice was even no heat in it, just clarity. You're trying to make this disappear. Those are different things. Silence, he said, quietly. You don't know what my father can do. She looked at him. I know exactly what your father can do. I've been watching what your family does for 6 weeks. She shifted her backpack strap. But here's what you don't know. You don't know what's already been built. You don't know how many people have already answered questions you don't know have been asked. He stared at her. She said, thank you for the offer. She walked back toward the school. The voice memo had been running since she left the building. She had turned it on before she walked out, the way she had been turning things on and writing things down and keeping copies since week 2, day 3. Because she had learned a long time ago that the moments that mattered most were the ones people later claimed had never happened. She let the recording run for 30 more seconds after she went through the door, stopped it, labeled it, PH East Lot, Wednesday 3:22 p.m., saved it to the cloud, kept walking. Nina published on Thursday morning, not full of investigation that come in pieces over the following weeks, but enough. The art room. 3 independent source confirmations, the pattern of complaints, the 6 closures, the 6 signatures. Deja Warren, named with her permission. Her account told in her own words about what had happened to her 3 years ago in this building, and what happened after she reported it, and what it had cost her to leave. The headline was, When the System Signs Off. It ran on the Tribune's education page with a secondary link from the front of the website. By noon, it had been shared over 1,000 times. By mid-afternoon, 2 local television stations had picked it up. By evening, it had reached the school board's inbox in the form of 11 separate emails from parents asking questions that didn't have comfortable answers. Zara didn't watch any of it. She was at her kitchen table with both notebooks submitted, reading through everything she had written since week 2, making sure she could speak to every date and every tint and every name with the same precision she had used to record them. She was not preparing a speech. She was not rehearsing. She was making sure that when she walked into that room tomorrow, nothing they asked her would find her without an answer. Her mother came home from work at 6:30, stood in the kitchen doorway, looked at the table covered in notebooks and printed pages. Zara was still holding Soldings, said, Channel 4 had your name. Zara said, I know, Elaine, and Channel 7. Zara said, I know. Elaine looked at her for a moment. Then she went to the cabinet and took out 2 mugs and made tea the way she always made it. No ceremony, no flourish, just the kettle and the bags and the right amount of time. She set 1 mug in front of Zara and stood at the counter with her own and looked out the window at the parking lot below. After a while, she said, You did it right. Zara looked up. Elaine was still looking out the window, her profile in the kitchen light, the expression she wore when something cost her to say, but she was saying it anyway. 3 words, same as always. But tonight, they carried something that hadn't been in them before. Something that took Zara a moment to identify because she was not used to receiving it from this direction. She looked back at her notebooks, said, The hearing is tomorrow. Elaine said, I'll be there. Zara looked up again, fast. Her mother was still looking out the window. She said, okay. She meant more than okay. But okay was what she had, and Elaine Coleman was not a woman who needed the translation. Friday morning. The sky was overcast in the particular way of mornings that don't intend to clear. Zara sat up at 5:30, not because she had to, because she wanted the hour before the bus, the quiet hour, the one that belonged only to her before anything was asked of it. She sat on the edge of her bed. She did her hairs, slow, deliberate, left side first. Each braid pulled even from root to end, the way her grandmother had shown her. The way she had been doing it since she was 7 years old, sitting between her grandmother's knees on a Sunday morning with the window open and the sound of the street below, and her grandmother's voice saying, start clean or don't start at all. She braided all 4, tied them off, stood up, looked at herself in the mirror. She looked exactly like herself. That was enough. That was actually everything. She ate half a piece of toast. Her stomach wasn't interested in more. She left at 7:15. The Aldrich Conference Room was named after a family that had donated the wing it sat in, which told you something about the room before you walked into it. Long table, upholstered chairs, windows looking out onto the courtyard where the old oaks had gone full amber and were beginning to let go. So when Zara arrived, Briggs was already there, standing near the window, jacket on, tie straight. He looked at her when she came in. Nodded once. She nodded back, the room filled. 3 Board of Trustees members, Dr. Caroline Marsh, who took her seat with the practiced composure of someone who had decided on her expression in advance. A district representative, Holt, the woman Nina had contacted, who carried a legal pad and the expression of someone who had read the trip piece twice and was deciding what it meant for her institution. Legal counsel for the Hale and Donner families. 2 lawyers in suits that had been chosen with the same care. Preston chose his collar. An HR representative, the board chair, who looked like a man who had hoped this week would go differently. 4 members of the local press granted access after a brief procedural argument that the board had ultimately decided was not worth the optics of refusing, and Emma Cabero, coat pressed, hands folded in her lap. Elaine Coleman, who had arranged her shift, who had come. Zara sat at the table, Briggs on her left. On her right, a chair that stayed empty for 2 minutes. And then Raymond Stubbs came through the door in clothes that didn't belong to his usual workday, moving carefully, the way a man moves when he is doing something that costs him, and has decided to pay the cost anyway. He found the empty chair, sat down, didn't look at Zara, just sat. She didn't look at him either. But something in the rooms changed when he sat down. She felt it, and she thought he probably felt it too. The particular shift of a space when the number of people willing to tell the truth increases by 1. The Hale family's lawyer opened his portfolio. Across the table, Gregory Hale himself was absent. His lawyer had explained in a prior written communication that Mr. Hale felt his presence might be perceived as undue influence, which was one way of saying he had read the Tribune piece and calculated that the room would not go the way he had expected. The board chair opened the hearing. He summarized its purpose: a formal disciplinary review to determine appropriate action regarding the incident of October 3rd, with consideration of all relevant documentation. He said relevant documentation with a weight that meant he had also done his reading. The Hale family lawyer went first. He was efficient and practiced. He laid out the incident, the physical altercation initiated by Mrs. Coleman, resulting in documented injury to 2 students, constituting a clear and unambiguous violation of the Harlow Academy Code of Conduct. He cited her prior record from her previous school. He used the word pattern. He used the word escalation. He cited the community standards language from the handbook twice. He sat down. Then Briggs opened the folder in front of him. He spoke without theatrics, without raising his voice or dropping it for effect. He had been in rooms like this for 20 years, and he understood that the most powerful thing you could do when people were expecting emotion was to give them only facts, clean, sequenced, irrefutable. He said, on October 3rd, at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, during 6th period art, student Jace Donner removed a pair of scissors from the supply cabinet and used them to cut a braid from the hair of student Zara Coleman from behind, without warning or consent. The incident was witnessed by 11 students and captured on the room's inventory camera. He opened his laptop, turned it toward the board, said it with your permission. The board chair said, proceed.
He played 45 seconds.
45 seconds was enough. You could see Jace move to the cabinet. You could see take the scissors. You could see him approach Zara from behind while she was working. You could see the moment. You could see Preston watching from across the room, not surprised, not reacting. Watching with a small, contained satisfaction, someone observing a plan execute correctly. And you could see Zara's hand go up. And you could see what she was holding when she stood. The Hale lawyer said. The footage from an inventory camera installed for Briggs was secured on the day of the incident and has been in my continuous possession since. Chain of custody documentation is included beginning on page 4 of your packets. He had prepared packets, 12 of them. Placed on the table before anyone arrived, the lawyer said, this doesn't change the nature of the physical response. Holt, the district representative, said quietly, let him finish. The lawyer sat back. Briggs said, I am also presenting documentation of 6 complaints filed with this administration over the past 3 years, involving students Preston Hale and Jace Donner, all closed within 7 days of filing, all bearing the same administrative signature. You'll find these beginning on page 11. The sound of 12 packets opening to page 11. Briggs said, in each case, the student who filed the complaint transferred within 30 days of closure. I have found no documentation of disciplinary action taken against either Mr. Hale or Mr. Donner in connection with any of these 6 complaints. Marsh said. Walter, he said. I'm not finished. She stopped. He said. I have also spoken with a former student, Deja Warren, now enrolled at college, who has submitted a written account of her experience at Harlow during the fall of 3 years ago. Her account was independently verified by the Tribune and is included beginning on page 19. He closed the folder. That is everything I have. He sat back. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when the thing everyone has been arranging themselves around suddenly cannot be arranged around anymore. Then Raymond Stubbs cleared his throat. He said, and his voice came out rougher than intended. The voiceman whose throat had decided to register the cost of what he was doing. I have something. The board chair looked at him. And you are? Raymond Stubbs. Building maintenance. I've been at Harlow 15 years. A pause. Go ahead, Mr. Stubbs. Racem set his phone on the table. He had queued it up before he came in. He said, on October 3rd, I was in the maintenance crawl space above the dart room. I've been trying to seal a section of leaking ductwork up there. I had my phone out as a light source. When I heard sounds below me that concerned me, I began recording. He pushed the phone to the center of the table. 2 minutes and 22 seconds. Briggs leaned forward and pressed play. This footage was different. The angle was closer, from above and to the left, through a gap in the vent housing, with the room's afternoon light making everything clear. You could see Gisay's face as he took the scissors. You could see him look across the room at Preston. You could see Preston's nod, small, contained, barely visible, but there, unmistakable once you were looking for it. You could see Jace walk towards Zara. You could see the moment. You could see the braid fall. Nobody in the room spoke for 2 minutes and 22 seconds. Not the lawyers, not Marsh, not the board members, not Gregory Hale's empty chair, which somehow managed to be the loudest presence in the room. When it ended, Raymond picked up his phone and put it back in his pocket and placed his hands flat on the table and looked at nothing in particular. Then Maya Osei said, I'd like to speak. She was in the row of chairs behind the main table. She had come in quietly before the hearing started and sat without announcing herself. And now she was standing with her hands clasped and her face set with the looks of someone who has been arguing with themselves for weeks and has finally stopped. The board chair looked at her. You are? Maya Osei. I'm a student here. I've been at Harlow since my freshman year, 3 years. She paused. I was in the art room October 3rd, 2 tables over. I saw what happened. He said, you have a statement, she said. I have something I should have said a long time ago. Nobody told her to sit down, she said. I came to Harlow 3 years ago and I learned very quickly how to survive here. How to make myself small enough that the people who do things like this don't bother with you. I told myself that was intelligence, strategy. She looked at her hands for a moment. What it actually was fear wearing a better name. The room was still. She said, I watched what happened to Zara in that classroom and I did nothing. Before it happened and while it happened. And I have spent the weeks since then thinking about the 2 years before it, 2 years of watching things happen to other people and making myself smaller and telling myself it wasn't my place. She looked up. It was my place. It has always been my place. I just chose not to occupy it. She paused. I saw Donner cut Zara Coleman's hair. I saw Preston Hale watch him do it. I saw 11 other people in that room go still because they understood that speaking up had costs that staying silent didn't. That is what I have. She sat down. The board chair looked at Holt. Holt was writing on her legal pad, long, deliberate strokes, the pen moving slowly. The Hale lawyer said, we would request a brief recess before, Holt said, still writing. I'd like to hear from Ms. Coleman first. Zara had been sitting quietly through all of it, not because she had nothing to say. Because she had learned from Darius, from the parking garage, and 20 minutes of drills and the question he had asked her on the hood of someone's old car, that the moment to speak was not the moment when everyone was already talking. It was the moment after. The moment when the room had run out of other things to hold on to and was ready, finally, to hold what you gave it. She stood up. No notes, no prepared language. She had read her notebooks the night before until everything in them was positive her, not memorized, but just known, the way you know the layout of a place you have lived in long enough. She said, my name is Zara Coleman. I'm 18 years old. I came to Harlow on a full academic scholarship in September because I earned it. Not because of a program or a preference, or anything other than the work I did and the scores I achieved. She looked at the room. I want to talk about my hair. She touched one of the braids at her shoulder. Just briefly. My grandmother taught me to do this. She sat behind me when I was 7 years old, and she put her hands in my hair, and she showed me how to hold each section, how tight to pull, how to keep it even from root to end. She paused. She died 11 months ago. And every morning that I sit down and do this, so I am in some small way in that room with her again. Every woman in my family learned this from the woman before her and passed it to the one after. That is what this is. The room was completely still. When someone picks up a pair of scissors and cuts that in a classroom in front of 11 people while someone across the room watches and nods, they are not cutting hair. They are cutting something they did not have the right to touch. Something that was not offered to them and did not belong to them. She looked at the board members. At each of them, the way she had looked at 11s in the art room 6 weeks ago. I hit Jace Donner. I am not going to tell you I regret it in the form you want, the apology, the promise to do better, the performance of shame. What I will tell you is the truth. I had spent 4 weeks absorbing everything that group did to me. I had filed a report that was used to warn them. I had moved through this building, knowing I was being tested, and I had done everything right by every rule this institution claims to hold. She paused. And they still cut my hair. She let that sit, let the room feel the weight of it. I am not here asking you to feel sorry for me. I am not here to be your symbol or your lesson or the difficult story you tell at equity workshops next semester. She looked at the words on the wall above the windows, the school motto. The same brass letters from the front entrance rendered smaller here: excellence, integrity, community. I am here because those words mean something, or they don't. And if they mean something, then what happened to me? And what happened to Deja Warren 3 years ago? And what happened to the other students whose names are in those files is not a lapse. It is the opposite of everything this school claims to be. She was almost done. She said, I don't want apologies that don't change anything. I don't want policies that exist in handbooks and nowhere else. What I want is for the student who comes here next year, who walks through that front entrance on a scholarship she earned, the way I earned mine, to be able to stay without having to fight the fought way I fought just to occupy the space she was given. One more pause. Make it real. Not for me. For her. She sat down. The room stayed quiet for longer than rooms usually stay quiet. Long enough that it stopped being silence and became something structural, a weight every room was now responsible for holding. The deliberation took 2 hours. Zara sat in the hallway outside on a bench that had been designed for waiting rather than comfort. Briggs sat beside her for the first hour, not talking much, just there. Raymond came out after 30 minutes and stood near the end of the hall with his jacket off and his phone in his hand, looking at it the way people look at something they're holding to have something to hold. Maya sat on the floor against the opposite wall, with her knees pulled up, not performing calm, just genuinely somewhere else in her head. And Elaine Coleman stood at the window at the end of the corridor. After 4 to 6, she walked over and sat beside Zara on the hard bench. They sat without talking. The way they had always done things, side by side, not quite touching, with the particular silence, two people who spoke the same language, but had never agreed on pronunciation. After a while, Elaine said, Your grandmother used to say you had too much in you for small spaces. Zara turned to look at her. Elaine was looking at her hands. When you were 9, you argued with the teacher about something. I don't even remember what it was now. I was so angry at you. I thought you were being difficult. She paused. Celestine said, That child has too much in her for small spaces. We need to find her bigger ones. Zara said, I didn't know she said that. Elaine said, I should have told you. She paused. I should have told you a lot of things. They sat. Zara said, We have time. Her mother looked at her. Something moved through Elaine Coleman's face, not dramatically, just the small, visible shift of a woman who had spent a long time being efficient about her feelings and was allowing carefully for some inefficiency. She said, Yes, we do. The board came out at 4:15. The chair stood to read the findings. Jace Donner, suspended for the remainder of the semester. The incident formally entered into his permanent record as target harassment with physical contact. The academic year to be repeated. Preston Hale. A formal investigation opened into a pattern of conduct extending across 3 academic years. All student council activities suspended pending outcome. Dr. Caroline Marsh, placed on administrative leave pending a separate investigation by the district superintendent's office into the handling of 6 prior complaints. The chair read this part slowly and without elaboration, which was its own kind of statement. New student conduct protocols to be developed under the coordination of the district representative, including an independent reporting mechanism not routed through school administration. An external ombudsperson to be appointed before the spring semester. And Zara Coleman's 5-day suspension, expunged from her record, full scholarship reinstated, a formal written apology from the board to be delivered within 10 business days. The chair looked up from the paper. He said, "Mrs. Coleman, on behalf of the board," she said, "Thank you, just that." Because she had heard what she needed, and she was not interested in the extended version, she found Briggs in the parking lot afterward. He was standing beside his car with his jacket still on and his phone in his hand. He put it away when he saw her. She said, "Well." He said, "Well," a moment of quiet that was actually rest. She said, "The ombudsperson process," he said, "I'm going to push for students on the reporting panel, not just adults interpreting what students mean when they say something happened." She said, "Good." He looked at her. "You did something today that I've been trying to build toward for 12 years, she said. "You did the work," he said. "So did you." She said, "We did it together." He was quiet for a moment then. "Don't let them make you small. At the next place, the one after that, wherever you end up." He paused. "You have too much in you." She looked at him, said, "Someone told me that recently, about needing bigger spaces." He said, "Smart person." She picked up her backpack, walked to the bus stop. Let the cold air of the late afternoon settle around her, the sound of the parking lot, a car somewhere starting up, the faint smell of cut grass from the grounds crew working past the fence line. She got on the bus, sat near the back, window seat, watched Harlow disappear behind her the way it had appeared 6 weeks ago, slowly through glass, getting smaller as the road curved away. And then the streets changed, and the cars got older, and the buildings got closer, and she was back in the air of somewhere real. She was home before dark, Monday morning. She got up at 5:30, not because she had to, because she wanted the hour. She sat on the edge of her bed and did her hair, slow, left side first. Each braid from root to end, even and clean, the way her grandmother had shown her, the way she would carry forward from here, not as a burden, not as a monument to what had been taken from her, but as the simple daily practice of a woman who knew what she was made of and took care of it accordingly. She braided all 4, looked at herself in the mirror, picked up her backpack. She was almost to the front doors of Harlow when she saw her. A girl, 19 maybe, with a backpack that was slightly too new, and the particular expression of someone who has arrived somewhere they have been working towards or for a long time, and is now standing in front of it trying to decide what they actually feel. She was looking up at the brass letters above the entrance. Excellence, integrity, community. Zara slowed, stopped. The girl noticed her, looked at her with the reflexive caution of someone who has learned that unexpected attention from strangers usually comes with a cost. Zara said, "First year?" The girl said, "Yeah." Zara said, "Scholarship?" A flicker. Most looked defensive. Full academic. Zara said, "Me too." The girl looked at her, really looked, taking in the 4 braids, the blazer, the particular quality of stillness that Zara had not had on her own first morning here and had spent 6 acquiring. The qualities of someone who has been tested by a place and is still standing in front of it. The girl said, "Is it hard?" And Zara thought about everything that question contained, the honest answers, the complicated true answers, the art room and the braid on the desk and Briggs' folder, and Raymond's phone and Maya standing up without being asked, and Deja Warren, who had been waiting 3 years for someone to stay, and her mother on a hard bench saying, "We have time," and Darius in the parking garage saying, "That's what I've been trying to teach you for 6 years. She said, "Yes." The girl's expression tightened. Zara said, "And you're going to be okay." She said, "It not as assurance, as information." The same way she had recorded dates and times and names since week 2, day 3, as a fact she had verified and was now passing on. The girl looked at her for a moment longer. Zara said, "I'll show you where the dean's office is first. You want to know where that is before you need it." She nodded toward the door. "Come on." She went in. The girl followed. Behind them, the brass letters caught the morning light, the way they caught it every morning, announcing their intentions to everyone who arrived with the presence of mind to look up and read them. Zara didn't look back at them. She already knew what they said. More importantly, she knew now what it would take, every day, by every person in that building who was willing to make them true.